Okay. So for weeks, what have I been telling you? We got to slow down. Read your Bible. Don't skip things. The genealogies are important. There's meaning, there's purpose, there's depth. And so this morning, we're going to skip the first 20 verses of Ezra chapter 8. And we're not going to read the genealogies today. And instead, we're going to jump to this question that I hope you find conviction in answering. And it's this question right here. Do your convictions always inform your actions? No, there's no irony between what I just said and this. It's okay, it's fine. Do your convictions always inform your actions? Do the things that you believe always inform what you do? Take a minute, turn to the person next to you, and see whether or not this is true of you or not. Do your convictions always inform your actions? Then we'll come back. Do your convictions always inform your actions? I guess it's one of those questions that you really have to understand what your convictions are, and then I suppose you could get around it by parsing out the term inform. But I think you all sort of know where I'm getting at. Do you put your money where your mouth is? Do you hold up to the things that you say? It's an integrity question. It's a what do you do when question. Well, we've been going through this series since the fall called Rebuild, where we've been going through Ezra and Nehemiah. We've been looking through all of these themes of what it looks like to rebuild worship, to rebuild faith. I know a lot of people, inside this room and that have been watching online, people that have been reaching out are talking about things in their own faith, in their own life that they've needed to tear down and rebuild. And so we've continued to go through this series. And last week, we saw that the last couple weeks here in the beginning of season 3, we've seen the introduction of Ezra, this person, this priest, this scribe who's coming now to Jerusalem to begin that process of really rebuilding worship. Zerubbabel and his group came first, and they rebuilt the temple. It was more of a construction project, and that got done, but now we need somebody to actually come in and lead from within that knows what's going on, that can do this well. And so this is Ezra's task. And so for the last couple weeks, first we kind of got the who is Ezra in that first week, and then last week we saw that he was sent by the king. And so this week we talk about his journey, the actual journey back from Babylon to Jerusalem. And it starts here in Ezra 8. It says, this is Ezra, I assembled them, the group of people he was going with, about 5,000 or so that ended up going, at the canal that flows towards Ahava, and we camped there 3 days. This is going to be important to remember, so just put a pin in that for a second. When I checked among the people and the priests, I found there were no Levites there. Okay, so this is problematic. So there's about 5,000 people that have camped just outside of town. They're getting ready to go on this journey that's months long. Ezra has, there's people in charge of different things to make sure everything all comes together. And so it's that final check. It's that slow down moment. We're going to camp together. We're going to make sure we've got all the pieces in place. And what he realizes is that there's no Levites there. And the Levites, these are the temple servants. They do all kinds of really important jobs. And if you're going to rebuild worship properly in the temple format, what you need is you need Levites. And so this is, a problem. And so it says, I summoned Eleazar, Ariel, Shemaiah, Elnathan, Jerib, Elnathan, Nathan. It's like Mike, Michael, and Mikey. I don't know. Zechariah, Meshullam, who were the leaders of Jorab, and another Elnathan, who were men of learning. It's like the most popular name in 2028. Make it happen. And I ordered them to go to Edo, who's a person, the leader, and Casiphia. Okay, so he's headed to Casiphia, and they're going to go talk to the leader, Edo. Casiphia is known for a place where there's actually a lot of Levites there. I told them what to say to Edo and his fellow Levites, the temple servants in Casiphia, so that they might bring attendance to us for the house of our God. So the king Artaxerxes has said, anybody who wants to go back can go back. A smaller contingent of people this time are headed back, but it doesn't look like either any of the Levites got the message or that none of them volunteered to go. But it's actually really important that they do arrive in Jerusalem. They have a role to play. So Ezra coaches up all of these folks who are going to go and find these Levites and go, hey, can some of you come here with us? But it's not because of the coaching or because of Ezra and the way that he's able to convince. Again, we see it because the gracious hand of our God was on us. They brought us Sherebiah, a capable man from the descendants of Malai, son of Levi, the son of Israel, and Sherebiah's sons and brothers, 18 in all, and Hashabiah together with Jeshiah and the descendants of Merari and their brothers and nephews, 20 in all. So a group of them ends up coming. Okay, so they've been camped 3 days. They realize they don't have what they need. Ezra instructs a bunch of people. Then they go out. They find some Levites. They agree to come back. And here we go again. They also brought 220 of the temple servants. Now, this is significant if you slow down. It says here, a body that David and the officials had established to assist the Levites. They were all registered by name. And so if you go all the way back to like the book of Kings and the way that the temple is structured and the way that David structured this in the first place, there's numbers of people and leaders and servants and people and priests all attached. And so because we know Ezra is not only a scribe, he understands everything really well, but he's also a teacher. He can execute and he can talk to other people on how to do it. Getting all of this stuff back together the way that David formed it in the first place has actually been a high priority for Ezra. And we can talk about how that ties into our lives later. So this is a significant sentence here as well. There by the Ahava Canal, I proclaimed a fast so that we might humble ourselves before our God and ask him for a safe journey for us and our children with all our possessions. Now, this seems like just not a throwaway sentence, but an obvious sentence. There's some depth here. We were doing sermon prep. James and I were sitting in my office on Tuesday. We're working through some stuff. And Lauren, our family ministry leader, knocks on the door. And she goes, hey, can I come sit in? And we were like, yeah, that would be awesome. And so we're starting to talk, and we read this verse, and a couple minutes later, we look at Lauren, and we're like, is anything pulling this out of you? And she said something that nobody has ever said in my office in 4 years. She said, well, I just got finished reading the book of Chronicles. Okay, cool. Some light reading. And she goes, and one of the things that I noticed about the book of Chronicles is there's a whole lot of kings that did well, and there's a whole lot of kings that didn't go well. And every time there's a king that does something well, this phrase exists near that king. She's like, I don't know how many times I read that this king humbled themselves before God. And it was the kings who went against or that did poorly where that phrase wasn't attached. And I went, well, that's making it into the sermon. That's great. And so just these little pieces of even the language of their history, the concept of we humbled ourselves before the Lord, something we're still continued to call to do, but even that phrase or that understanding had so much depth and meaning going all the way back. So go home and read Chronicles. I was ashamed, and I just love this 2-verse set here. I was ashamed to ask the king for soldiers and horsemen to protect us from the enemies on the road. Okay. So we're going to get into this in a minute because we're going to go through all the count of all the stuff. But they have about 5,000 people, and they've got a lot of stuff. They've got silver, they've got gold. Like, we're talking an enormous amount of money and possessions here. And they're going to take a 4-month trek across an area that's fairly treacherous, and they're going to leave themselves potentially exposed to being robbed or that sort of thing. And so you would think, which is reasonable, that they're a little nervous about that. But Ezra doesn't feel like he can ask the king, even though Artaxerxes has given him all this money, he's given him the resources, he's given him control of certain things in Trans-Euphrates. Once he gets there, he's given him the freedom to make all of these choices and to enact laws. He's given him all this power, but then Ezra says, I was ashamed to ask the king for soldiers and horsemen. So I've got all this stuff to protect, but I was ashamed to ask the king for soldiers and horsemen. And there's two kinds of shame, and we're not going to get super deep into this. Not all shame is negative, because some of it, when you feel ashamed, there's negative shame when it comes to the way it sees how you view yourself and whether or not you're valuable. But then there's the part of that emotion or that feeling that leads you towards good decision making, accountability. And I would make sure that you actually look into that so that you know which one is which. That's really important. But here it says, I'm ashamed to ask the king for soldiers and horsemen to protect us. Why? Why would Ezra be ashamed to ask the king for protection for all of these things that clearly need protection? Well, it's because of what he said to the king before all this happened. He said, because I've told the king before that the gracious hand of our God is on everyone who looks to him, but great is the anger against all who forsake him. So here's Ezra's problem. Ezra's problem is that he's got all of these people and all these valuable items, and he's going to travel a long distance, and they're going to leave themselves exposed. But he feels that if he goes to the king and says, we need your protection, that actually goes against what he's told God, which is God is protecting us. He doesn't want to, in the eyes of the king, make it look like he's hedging his bet. Like, I believe God will protect me, but just in case God forgets, I've got the king's soldiers. This is a huge money where his mouth is moment. This is a convictions and actions moment. This is where he's got all the reasons in the world to make a worldly choice, but he's convicted by the things that he's already said he believes in. So what does he do? He says, we fasted and petitioned our God about this, and he answered our prayer. So does he do nothing? No. He's still nervous, he's still a little worried, but he knows what he said. So instead of taking worldly actions, instead of going, I'm going to talk to the king, he's going to send me this giant group of people to protect us, instead of doing that, he goes, I'm going to God. And they fast, and they ask God, and they say, we just need you here with us on this journey. And it says, and he answered our prayer. So that doesn't mean that they likely didn't feel nervous or there weren't some hairy moments, but they had the confidence that God was going to carry through for them, and they were following through on the thing that they had told the king in the first place. And then I shrunk this down so that it all fits. Then I set apart 12 of the leading priests, namely Sherebiah, Hezekiah, and 10 of their brothers, and now this is going to become important, I weighed out to them the offering of silver and gold and the articles that the king and his advisors and his officials and all of Israel had presented there and donated to the house of our God. Some quick math, it's 750 talents of silver. 1 talent equals somewhere between 20 and 25 years' wages. Quick math, that's about 18,000 years of a laborer's wage. The gold is worth a lot more than that, so we're talking maybe 250,000 years worth of wages. They're going with a lot of money. They have kingdom resources at their disposal. They aren't rich guy rich, they're rich country rich. Okay? And they're traveling, there's a reason for them to be nervous. Yet they petition to God and they say, we need your protection through this. And then it says, I weighed out to them 650 talents of silver and silver articles, 100 talents, weighing 100 talents, 100 talents of gold, 20 bowls of gold, value at 1,000 derricks, and 2 fine articles of polished bronze, as they are precious. And then, after weighing out all of these articles and figuring out what they've got, probably 2 reasons for this. The first is if the king is going to give you a bunch of stuff to use, there might have been some kind of accountability structure where then you had to weigh it once you got there and send word back to the king that you were actually using the gold that he gave you for what it was supposed to be used for, but also internal accountability for their group to ensure that nobody, a gold bowl didn't, fall off the cart along the way or whatever. Okay, important. Then it says this. It says, I said to them, this is Ezra looking at the priests. He said, you, as well as these articles, are consecrated to the Lord. The silver and gold are a freewill offering to the Lord, the God of your ancestors. That's one of those big theological words, consecrated. What it really means is these things are set apart for God's use and purpose. Ezra looks at this group and he goes, just so you know, this group of people and this group of items, they are consecrated. They are for a specific purpose that God is giving them. He doesn't give them any more privilege or any more importance, but the weight and the responsibility of not only them and what they're doing, but their things are now piled on. Even more of a reason to trust that God is going to do what he says. He says, guard them carefully until you weigh them out in the chambers of the house of the Lord in Jerusalem before the leading priests and the Levites and the family heads of Israel. This before isn't time-wise, this is in front of. So just so you know, when we get to Jerusalem, we're going to weigh all this out again, and you're going to do it in front of everybody. Accountability. Are you doing what you say you're going to do? And we're going to make sure that all of this actually makes it where it's supposed to go. Then the priests and the Levites received the silver and gold and sacred articles that they had been weighed out and taken to the house of our God in Jerusalem. On the 12th day, okay, so how long did they camp out for before they were going to head out? 3 days. But now it's taken 12. So they had to slow down. They took a minute first to make sure they had all the things that they had. Then they realized they didn't have all the things that they had. So then they slowed down to find the people that they needed. They made sure those people came back. Then they took time to fast and pray and petition. They went, hey, and listen, we have all done this. Uh-oh. Sorry. We've all done this thing where we were on time and then we were behind. Okay? We've done that. And then, before we left, we knew there was one more thing we should do. And you go, do I have to do that thing? Or can I just leave it? Can I just push it under? It will be back. It's just 2 dishes. They're not going to grow that much mold. Whatever. I don't know what it is. Okay? Here, just like in our lives, a lot of times the last thing we do before we leave, the thing we're supposed to do, that little button is just talking to God one more time before we go. And they go, okay, well, we camped, we made sure we got the Levites, we took the time to get the Levites, now we're really behind. Remember, we're trying to leave on the first day, this is important, this is symbolic to our time, but now we're behind, and if we're going to arrive in the right month, we got to whatever. No, we're going to slow down. Not only are we going to slow down while we're already behind, we're not going to eat. We're going to fast. We're going to petition to God. We are going to make sure we slow down in this moment enough to go, God, make sure you're with us on this journey. So, they're a few days late. Okay, maybe not a bad lesson for us here. Maybe every once in a while, that extra moment that you went, if I can just make up the time here. And so often, it's your prayers, or it's your Devo, or it's your Bible reading that gets snaked out in the morning, or it's, we had a busy day and we got to dinner 10 minutes late, and now the kids are running off, and we usually do something at the table, but we're just going to cut that, and it's probably fine. It's always God in the margins that gets cut, isn't it? But it's Ezra here that goes, no, we're not doing that. We're going to take the extra time. We're going to be a little late. We're going to make sure that God is with us on this journey. So when we arrived in Jerusalem, and we rested 3 days. Again, we got there after all this journey. We're just going to take a break. And on the 4th day in the house of our God, we weighed out the silver and gold and the sacred articles into the hands of Meremoth, son of Uriah the priest. Eleazar, son of Phinehas, was with him, and so were the Levites, Jozabad and Jeshua and Noadah and Binnui. And everything was accounted for by number and weight. And the entire weight was recorded at that time, not just for them, but likely for the kingdom as well. And then, I love the last part of this story. It's so cool. It's one of the very last things we caught on Tuesday. Then the exiles who had returned from captivity sacrificed burnt offerings to the God of Israel. Okay, so we read this, if you remember, when Artaxerxes writes a letter to Ezra saying what to do. In chapter 7, verse 17, it says, with this money be sure to buy bulls and rams and male lambs, together with grain offerings and drink offerings, and sacrifice them on the altar of the temple of your God in Jerusalem. And then he says, do whatever you want to do with the rest. And then, remember, he buttons it up with anything else you need for the temple you should take. And then at the very end, he talks about, why should I not have the favor of your God by doing this? Remember, this is government funded. They're on the way. But Artaxerxes also has his own motivations. It's both to keep the peace within his kingdom, but also to keep this group of Jews happy. So they've been commanded to do this sacrifice. So it is reasonable then, when Ezra gets there, the exiles who return from captivity, they do burnt offerings. So they did 12 bulls for all of Israel, 96 rams, 77 male lambs. Again, these numbers are whole numbers biblically. They have meaning. And then a sin offering with 12 male goats. All of this was a burnt offering to the Lord. That wasn't in the instructions. It wasn't in the instructions. We had the instructions. We had the goats, we had the lambs, we had the grain offerings, we had the male lambs, we had the rams. Why are these here? We did some reading, we looked around. Here's the only thing we could come up with. And, maybe theologically, I don't know, I could be out in left field. But for me, this is an example of Ezra did what he was asked to do by the king, but then he did what he knew he was supposed to do to God too. He didn't just do the minimum. He went the extra bit. He did the extra piece. Listen, I wasn't told to do this by the king. This part was the king, but part the king told me to do. And that means something in our ritual here, but this extra part, we're making sure we add on. Because we're not just going to do what they command us to do. We're going to do what God calls us to do as well. It's that extra bit. It's that extra. Gosh, I just love that so much. All this was a burnt offering to the Lord. So they also delivered the king's orders. Remember, the king told all the governors around to listen to Ezra. So they delivered the orders to the royal satraps and the governors of the Trans-Euphrates, who then gave assistance to the people into the house of God. There's so much packed into this little bit here. Here are the three things that I pulled out first. Again, I know this has been a theme throughout this series and this season so far, but goodness gracious, if we could just slow down for a half minute. Just slow down. Ezra's going to miss he's going to miss a whole group of people that are going to be important to the worship in the temple if he doesn't slow down. And then he slows down, he makes sure they're there, and then he goes, I could just get the king's soldiers, but instead I'm going to do the thing that actually requires faith, the thing that I've been called to do, and I'm going to stand up for my convictions and the things that I've said that I believe in front of this king. I don't want to be viewed as a king. Ezra is a representative of the God of Israel to this king. And Ezra goes, I just don't want to be a hypocrite in front of this person. Don't lose that point in this story. Ezra slows down. And then, and this might be the hardest one for all of us. I don't actually know, but it's so easy to do. Ezra didn't hedge his bet. Ezra believed that God was going to do something for him. He believed that God had told him and called him to do something, and he didn't hedge his bet. He didn't put the extra layer of human protection on it. He didn't go, just in case God doesn't do the thing he said he was going to do, I'm going to make sure God's work gets done by my hand. I got to tell you, this seems like a simple concept. It's really easy for me to say. It requires so much discernment in slowing down. It requires slowing down and discernment to actually know what God is calling you to do and feel confident in it. It takes slowing down and reading and prayer and discernment to understand not only what God is calling you to do, but how you're supposed to do it. And then it takes an enormous amount of discipline to go, I truly believe this is what God's called me to do, and I'm not going to add to the plan. That doesn't mean that God doesn't call us to create a plan, and this is where discernment and understanding and listening to God becomes more than just a ritual or something we do, but it becomes a lifestyle, it becomes a choice, it becomes something we really need to lean into, because in order to not hedge our bets against God, we actually need to slow down long enough to understand what He's telling us to do, which is, I understand, a challenge, but this is just so easy. It's so easy. I've talked to people who have done it. I can't think of specific examples other than to know that I've more than likely done it on multiple occasions, which is, I know God called me to do this thing, and I think it's really important that it gets done, so I'm going to take 2 extra steps to make sure it happens, even though He doesn't think He needs to take those steps. Like, what unbelievable arrogance. But we're just prone to it. You got to watch it. I love that Ezra doesn't hedge the bet. And then finally, he sacrifices. He sacrifices his time. He makes sure those who are coming back to do this long journey, they're all taking a sacrifice. And then with the sacrifice itself, they do more than is required by the government to do, more than they've been asked. An incredible example of somebody who puts their money with their mouth is. It's this simple phrase that we've been hearing since we were 5 years old. And it's that your actions will always speak louder than your words. And it's true. They always will. And here's a great example of Ezra multiple times showing not only his faith to his people by his actions, but his faith to his king and his government and the people that have entrusted him with all this by his actions. Somebody who's been given incredible power, but doesn't use that power instead of God's power. Still relies on what God says he's going to do. And this is, I got to tell you, we've been talking about credibility for the last couple weeks. There's nothing that's going to break down our credibility with our neighbors and our friends and those who work with us when we say something with such conviction to them about God and then they watch us do something else. And whether or not they actually ever come up to you and go, hey, it kind of seems like your actions show that you're full of it. It doesn't mean they're not thinking it. This is like the biggest risk we have right now in a world and social media and all of the things that we're seeing, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum or the news or your affiliation or this or that or whatever. There are so many moments where we read Scripture and we are convicted by it, and then we say something from it, and then we do not do it. And you cannot blame a single person that ever stands in front of you and goes, I'm having a whole lot of trouble seeing Jesus and why this stuff is really important when you talk about how important it is and you don't do the thing you're talking about. Ezra doesn't do that. The whole way through, he does the thing he's supposed to do. Now, as we transition from this to communion, which we're going to take this morning, is there any better example of this than Christ on the cross? Christ comes and he tells a whole bunch of stories, right? He shares all these parables. The parable of the Good Samaritan, this story of somebody who looks after a group of people that is apart from their group of people, that are different, that don't get along with Jews. You're supposed to look after these people. That's a great parable, Jesus. There's the parable about the vineyard workers, right? The one where somebody starts early in the morning and then somebody else starts a little later and somebody starts a little later and somebody starts a little later, and then at the end of the day they all get paid off the same because they're all loved equally by the master, even the people who only worked an hour. It's the people that have been working all day that are upset. But what joy and love those people that start in the end. How many parables do we have of this? And Jesus was an incredible teacher and understood the law and was an extraordinary just teacher of what to do and how to understand life. But I understand that you've said, hey, there's no greater love than sacrificing yourself for your friend. But at the end of the day, are you actually going to do it? And so the night before, Jesus knows that after this entire ministry of showing people who God really is and who they're called to be, he's a day away from this big actions speak louder than words moment. He sat with his disciples and he took a piece of bread and he broke it and he said, this is my body and it's broken for you. And when you eat this bread, I want you to remember my broken body for you. And as the disciples are trying to figure out what that means, or some of them are starting to figure out what it means, but maybe they're in denial, this can't actually be true. There must be a way for this action to happen. He takes the wine and he holds it up and he said, this wine, it signifies my blood and it's poured out for you for the sacrifice of sin. And when you drink it, remember me. And during this Last Supper, Jesus foreshadows this moment on the cross that would come very recently, which is the reason that we are all actually here. It's the reason we worship, the reason that we celebrate at Easter and at Christmas. It's the thing that we can turn to our neighbor with confidence and go, I know that by the grace of Jesus, I'm saved and I'm loved and I'm cared for and I'm secure and all of these things, because Jesus didn't just talk about how great it would be. Jesus then showed everybody exactly what it looked like to live it out. So as we take communion here as a group this morning, be thankful for Christ and the sacrifice that he gave. But perhaps sit and be convicted in what it looks like for you too to represent that to others. I wonder how hard it was for Jesus to not hedge his own bet. I wonder, he had this thing he knew he had to do. He was called to do it. It was the only way to show everybody what needed to happen. But he had the power to stop it at every turn. You think about him being tempted in the desert. It didn't need to be there. Didn't need to do it. Could have left early. Didn't show the example. Everything he said to people, the way he backed it up. Standing on trial, a totally one-sided, unfair trial. Probably could have done what he needed to do to make it turn out different, didn't. On the cross, with the power to take him off, with people mocking him, telling him to do it, yet stayed the course. What's the power and the authority without the follow-through? Without the action? Without the actual sacrifice? And so, this morning, as we celebrate the Last Supper, we're celebrating that Christ did what he said he would do, and that he did it for me and for you. Let's drink and eat together. We've been talking about this concept of credit for the last couple weeks. And sometimes the opposite side of credit is blame. And my grandma, my Baba, she would use the word blame as a good thing. She would blame God for all kinds of things. Oh, I have such a wonderful family. I blame God for that. Or something good happened in my life. I blame God for that. It was so funny to listen to her do it. I was in her house yesterday. Her kitchen table, there's an open Bible with I don't know how many of these different versions of those daily bread things there are, but apparently there's a lot because she's got them all. And they're all open to the same day. And then you go to the bathroom, not like TMI, but they're right there in front of the toilet. There's 4 more. We catch it for spending too much time in the bathroom. She, I swear, did half her discipleship there. It's a woman who told our family again and again and again and again what it looked like to actually follow Jesus. And you walked into her house, and she didn't need to tell you she read her Bible that day. It was all over the house. It's the actions that spoke louder than the words. This is the kind of Christ follower that I want to represent to the world. It's what Ezra did. It's what Christ showed us to do. It's what we're called to do in the small corners, in the small conversations, in the little passersby, in the hallway, with the person that you don't like, with the person you're trying to avoid, with the crazy uncle, with all of them. How are you actually backing up the thing that you come here on a Sunday morning and so firmly say that you're entrenched in? How do we represent Christ in all the things that we do? We're not always going to get it perfect. That's what grace is for, and that's the beauty of it. But I would challenge you to try. And in the moments when you know you're short, don't hedge your own bet. Slow down. Come back to God and go, hey, you said you were going to do this, and I believed it. And so I just need you to come alongside me and find the way through. God bless you today as you go. Please get home safely. Please think about this and what it looks like for the rest of your week. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you again really soon.